This is Nightingale, an interdimensional steampunk adventure, and the inaugural title from Inflection Games. It's been a hotly anticipated title for many, and after a few years of closed previews, it's finally entering early access. It looks something real special, and I'm here today to tell you why you should have this on your radar. So let's dig in and talk about Nightingale. So first, the basics. It's an open world survival game, which I know can be divisive, but just stick with me. It's got all the hallmarks of the genre. You'll discover new lands, build and fortify an estate, gather resources and hunt down exotic prey. There's quests to undertake, secrets to uncover, and titanic foes to topple. It's got a Victorian aesthetic that the developers are dubbing gas lamp punk, with a healthy dose of fey magic scattered throughout the world. Much like your Victorian counterparts, you're ingenious, curious, and industrious. But unlike them, you can manipulate the very fabric of space and time. Now, I'm no historian, but I'm fairly certain Queen Vic couldn't do that. Your wanderlust will drive you to explore the world around you and push further into the mysteries that lay just over the horizon. But here's the twist. Unlike other survival games, you don't just pick a direction and walk until you discover your next challenge. The whole premise revolves around these portals, which will take you to strange worlds which pose ever-increasing threats. But there's a lot more to them than that. It's an ambitious and unique system that I want to talk about more, but I'll get onto it later. So, this is the first title from Inflection, and given what we know so far, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's all a bit ambitious. I mean, we just had the whole Day Before saga, so now we're all a little bit guarded on lofty promises. But despite this being a new studio, Inflection do have some serious chops. The Canadian studio was formed in 2018 by industry veterans, and some renowned devs commanding the helm. They have games like Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and Far Cry on their resume. So they've got some impressive credentials, with games known for having narrative front and centre. But now they're taking on a genre known for leaving narrative as an afterthought. That just doesn't add up, does it? Now, I've said they're doing things differently, and that encompasses pretty much every aspect. This isn't just another zombie fling, or your standard stuck on a desert island setting. No, this feels a lot more fleshed out. Monster design is inventive. Enemies have a backstory. The world is filled with key characters that'll play an integral part of your own personal journey. And they aren't just making this for the sake of making it. They're putting the work in to craft something worthwhile. Not just another survival game, but something that takes the formula and spins it in a different direction. And this should open the doors to potential players who don't usually go for this sort of thing. They've got the talent and a lot of backing too. Most survival games will be solo projects or have a tiny team behind them. But despite being a new studio, they've grown to over 100 developers, made up of more industry veterans as well as breakthrough talent. These lot aren't following a trend or looking at a market and just reacting to it. They are innovating, and in a big way. Now, obviously, they're not reinventing the whole genre from the ground up, because frankly that would be ludicrous. Other studios have spent the last decade refining the formula, and Inflection aren't here to upset the apple cart, but they are building on it. The gameplay loop is your standard fare. Get resources, craft items, build a house, get better resources, get better items, etc, etc. As you progress, you'll encounter new enemies, more dangerous realms, and if you've got the gusto, face off against some monstrous boss enemies known as apexes. These will require a lot of planning, luck, and bravado to overcome, but luckily, you don't have to face them alone. You can share your Nightingale journey with up to 5 other players, discovering realms together. The way they're implementing this multiplayer is actually quite clever. Usually in this type of game, you join a friend directly. However, that locks you into only playing when they're online, as the world is handled locally to them. If you wanted to circumvent this, you'd need access to a private server. Now, these are usually around £10, dollars or euros a month, depending on the game and number of slots, which isn't nothing. But this isn't something you need to worry about with Nightingale. Essentially, if you play with friends, you can set a world as your respite realm. This now becomes your default world, and next time you log in, you'll return back there, whether with your friends or alone. Fundamentally, it's a great system that combines the ease of playing with co-op with the freedom of a private server. But that's not the only way Nightingale is doing things differently. There's other little sparks of originality, be that the NPCs you can recruit to work on your estate, the variations in enemies to increase monster diversity, or their interesting approach to building. It's not uncommon for games like this to offer tools to decorate your abode to your heart's content. This is more than enough to keep players busy for hours on end. But here, decorating is more functional. It affects your workstations and changes the items you create. This means that A, all those hours spent as a home renovator serve some gameplay purpose, and B, players are incentivized to not live in a minimalist 2x2 stone box. I mean, you still can, but think of all the benefits of living luxuriously. I mean, come on, have some self-respect.
Stop it. Get some help.
And whilst all of that is great, it's not the game's defining feature. Nightingale's big selling point is its realm system. Most other survival games split a map into several areas or biomes. They typically have differing landscapes, offer varying resources, and provide a greater challenge. Nightingale does this in a very different way. Let's say you want to go explore a forest. You don't pick a direction and wait until you hit trees as you would in every other game. You have to find a portal. You select a forest as your destination. Maybe you also want to hunt some animals to gather leather and meat. And you want it to be perpetually nighttime to give yourself an element of surprise. So what do? Well, you modify the forest realm with special cards to tailor the outcome. And voila! There you are. A nighttime forest teeming with wildlife. As it's procedurally generated, there'll still be plenty of surprises waiting for you, but in essence, you're shaping the worlds around you. And if you make a combination you really like, you can settle right there and make it your new home. This is genuinely a really interesting way to do things. Each portal has a console where you place cards, and they have different tiers. Biome cards will be the biggest change, making the destination a swamp or a forest or a desert or whatever else they decide to add in. Major cards are big sweeping changes that might affect the strength of enemies or the resources you might find. And minor cards are smaller tweaks to really individualize each realm. Now look, I know procedural generation has become a go-to in this genre, but allowing for adjustments like this is a really good way to go. Honestly, having a massive, sprawling, randomly generated world isn't all that impressive if there's nothing to do in it. Starfield! And this system has another big advantage. When it comes to adding content down the line, every expansion will become substantially more valuable. A new biome doesn't just give you a new area to explore, but an entirely new place to modify, evolve, and change in any number of ways. I think Inflection have really struck gold with this design because they can keep introducing realm cards and modifiers, and each will provide far more value than if they just added a new map or area. It also doesn't hurt that Nightingale is visually a step above the norm. Let's be honest, most survival games aren't great to look at. That's not usually a deal breaker. I'll take substance over style any day. But this looks like it's doing both, so that's a big win. Now I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Other titles in this genre have looked great, but that does usually come at a cost of being very resource intensive or poorly optimized. I don't know if those same issues will plague Nightingale, but I'm hoping the experience of the developers means it won't fall into this trap. And I do think they're on the right track, especially with their approach to the game's release. Early access has become more prevalent in the past few years. It's had a bit of a bad rap in the past, with many devs in a rush to drop a game in a barely playable state, and only once they've sold their first wave of copies, then getting to work to make the bloody thing any good. But Inflection have been deliberately holding off by doing several rounds of closed beta tests instead to gather crucial information. The game's been put through its paces, stress tested, taking on player feedback, and being tuned before it reaches the general public. Honestly, that's the standard I'd love to see in early access, but I do appreciate it's not an option for every dev. Nonetheless, it's good to see Inflection take their time and use the open stage development period to really hone the game and fill in those blanks. I've got a sneaking suspicion they're going to be taking their community's input quite seriously. Following suggestions from their audience, they added in a third-person camera mode and introduced offhand item functionality, both no small feats in any sense. The past few years have been tumultuous for gamers. More than a few disappointments have left us feeling battered, beaten and vulnerable. But you know, I think I'm ready to have a bit of faith once more. And I'm going to put that faith in Nightingale. It looks like a breath of fresh air. And if the devs can stick the landing and utilize the early access period properly, it could grow into something really special. Or of course, it could fall flat on its face, in which case, I quit. I'll have suffered one too many disappointments and I'll just stop playing games. Maybe I'll take up making model aircraft or even reading. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you excited for Nightingale? Do you think it'll have a lasting impact? And what code of paint should I use for my Mark V C Spitfire model?